Okay. So just cultivating a moment of awareness. Just doing that in whatever way feels good to you. Connecting with the breath, connecting with the body, or just connecting with awareness itself. Just remembering one quality of the Dharma that's been so meaningful to you, either recently or just in general, or maybe something early on in your Dharma study and practice. And generate a sense of appreciation for that quality of the Dharma, what it brings into your life, what it brings into your relationship with your thoughts, emotions, others around you, your experience of happiness or suffering. And from that sense of appreciation, just remembering how much of a shelter this is for us, how much of a refuge. One way we traditionally think of the Dharma as a medicine. So in what way has this been a medicinal balm for you? Just connecting with that feeling of appreciation, warmth. And the Buddha, the founder of our lineage, the Buddha is like the doctor of this medicine, where he taught this medicine widely based on his own realization. And thankfully, this medicine spread and healed many, many, many sentient beings, and will continue to heal many sentient beings. So just including the Buddha also in our appreciation, which may include some of our teachers as well. And our teachers, as well as all of our Dharma friends, are also part of the Sangha, the community that supports our practice. So this gift that we've received, this medicine we've received of the Dharma, and that we're continually deepening here, we've managed probably to uncover some insight, uncover some health, uncover a little more movement towards awakening through our meditation. You know, whether we know it or not, probably we have. We've been meditating a little while. And so even if we remain confused and struggle sometimes and still have a lot of questions in relation to the Dharma, we've met it and we have the potential to grow it. And just reflecting on these four rivers, birth, old age, sickness, and death for ourselves, as we explored last week, and also just this mind that gets confused, where we take our emotions and thoughts to be self, where we get confused based on subjective perception, taking it to be a real and true object outside of us, that then sometimes we develop anger, aversion towards, sometimes clinging and attachment, sometimes other kinds of afflictive states that cause suffering for ourselves and others. So here we generate a sense of compassion towards our own confusion. Also a sense to want to remedy that, which is really the essence of renunciation. from there, reflecting on all sentient beings. Just as we are in our confused state, we've met this medicine of the Dharma. Look how many sentient beings struggle and suffer at many different levels, all kinds of different kinds of confusion and suffering, misknowing, emotional, physical pain, uncomfort, moving from life to life in samsara, really without a refuge. Generate some compassion for them. This wish that wishes they can be free from that suffering, both the temporary and the ultimate of being, bound to samsaric mind. And from this mind of compassion, we generate altruism. We wish to take responsibility that through our study and practice today, these really, really become an effective way to gather the energy of awakening so that we can help all beings to awaken. And that's the mind of bodhicitta, that we're not just here doing this for ourselves alone, that yes, we need to gather our own sustenance. We need to make sure we are not mired in confusion ourselves, but then we use that wisdom, that clarity that we're working towards to benefit all others. So just generating that mind of bodhicitta based on this compassion of recognizing our own confusion, the confusion of all beings, the way that confusion plays out in all the different types of suffering, the different kinds of misperception that happen to ourselves and others. So with that, when we chant these words, now we have something to bring to the words, right? It's not just a dry, chant. It's not just lip service. It's something alive. So bring all of those feelings that arose, all of those deeper reflections and deeper reflections and insights you just had, bring it in here. And so we'll chant in Tibetan and just allow the opening of the heart through the melody, the meaning of the words, everything we just reflected on. Sangye chodong sogi chonam la chanshu bardu dani kyamsu chi dagi chunyengi pesunam gi chola penshir sangye druparsho. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodon sogi chonam la changchu bardu dani kyamsu chi dagi chunyengi pesunamgi chola penshir sangye druparsho. Hey, thank you very much. All right. So welcome back, and we'll continue here to explore the text. I wanted to name something because for those of you live here, maybe people listening, recording, in 3 sessions, really, I just have time to really go into more Dharma talks on it, lectures on the material. But there's a whole other set of teachings and or perspectives we can explore on how to meditate on this stuff. I gave a little bit last week, right? So I gave some reflections, meditation for you to do on the verses, but especially the verses we're going into now on emptiness, on the third principal aspect of the path. There's a rich, tradition of actual practices we would do on this. And I just, I would just say we because of the nature of how we set this up, I don't have time to go into those, right? So it's more kind of giving the information, talking about it a little bit that you can take away and reflect on. And then, at another time we can go into the meditations, or, all of you are welcome into my mentoring communities and stuff, that we go a lot more into the practice element there. So either way, or other teachers, there's lots of other teachers who will give the practice element of this, and also books, but there's something around books that is not sufficient for practice. Like often when it's a practice instruction, it's really good to hear it from a teacher, it's really a better way to hear it. So anyways, maybe we can create the the interdependence for something like that. Or like I said, in my other communities, you can join. Great. So we are on verse 9, I believe. So just a little recap coming from the last, the last verses 7 and 8. These were, referring to the practice of relative bodhicitta, really developing, for most of us where we're at, really it's the aspirational bodhicitta that we're focusing on, the aspiration that, I wish to attain awakening, and I see all other sentient beings are suffering as well. So I wish to do that with a state of mind, an energy that wishes not to just work on my own awakening, but wishes that I'm doing this for the benefit of all sentient beings, meaning that my awakening has purpose. It's not just for my own means, that awakening itself will evolve into enlightened activity that can then benefit sentient beings as long as samsara exists. So this really, I would say the main practice is bodhicitta. There's no doubt about this, So no matter how much we meditate on emptiness, if we don't have a proper relationship to bodhicitta and the reasons why we're meditating on emptiness, emptiness can lead to liberation, but it won't lead to enlightenment. So there is some kind of warning here, that it's something, it's more like a warning to myself as well. I get very attracted to these higher teachings, and I love studying emptiness. I love meditating on it. It has its own challenges, but in general, I've been attracted to that. And then there's many forms of meditating on emptiness. There's meditating via Sutrayana methods, which is mainly what we're exploring here. And then there's tantric ways of meditating on emptiness. And so some of these things can be very attractive, but really the more you do it, the more you learn, the more you study, the more you practice, it all comes back down to bodhicitta. Because at the end of the day, the why, if the why isn't clear in our heart, and our heart isn't directed and open to other sentient beings, and open to, a very profound why of why we're meditating on emptiness, eventually we get a little bit, how do you say it? It gets stale, it gets dry. It's maybe a way to put it. So, there's no like linear way to do this. Most of us, we're just going through these three principles again and again. So it's not like, we're presenting it in a linear way, but in practice, it's not linear at all, right? So we're just going back through again and again. But the more and more I reflect on it, really the essence is bodhicitta. And, when you listen to great masters teach the Dharma, they always teach bodhicitta as the highest thing, and there's a reason for that. But I think there's also there's some work we have to do to recognize that. I will say this, which maybe people won't say. I believe it's really difficult to connect with authentic relative bodhicitta until we've studied emptiness. That's my perspective, right? That's been my experience. So it's kind of a catch-22, where until we really understand how the mind is truly bound, and we really only understand that when we study emptiness and when we put it into practice, because we see directly how bound we are to duality, right? Then we can start to develop a proper relative bodhicitta motivation. But that's not the way it works sometimes, because in the gradual path, they present it as, okay, first you need to develop this bodhicitta. Now, for me, that's also useful because we kind of set the tone there's the premise of like, why are we meditating on emptiness? Because we want to be free from clinging and free from suffering. And why are we doing that? Because we want to awaken for the benefit of all beings. So there is a reason we put bodhicitta first, right? Because the motivation has to come first. But the deepening of the bodhicitta, this circular process, this nonlinear process I'm speaking to, I found comes back around in a more profound way after the emptiness teachings. So almost it's, this paradox of, how am I going to free all sentient beings? It gets answered through the recognition and deepening of emptiness, right, in our practice. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. It turns into, I would say at best, it turns into a practice of relative virtue, which is really good. That's not, there's no sense in demeaning that at all. We all need that. We need to cultivate virtue, and we need to mitigate or reduce non-virtue. This is just part of the Buddhist path. And so at best it becomes that, which is a pretty good best, because definitely we're going to move from strength to strength. We'll be able to create the causes for higher rebirths due to that. We'll be able to meet the Dharma again and again, and we'll be able to continue to practice because of that virtue. But that virtue, if it's not seen or cultivated with a mind of emptiness, it still is within samsara, right? So we have to acknowledge that at some point. But it's I think of it like this: we're cultivating a very good dream. So in a way, it's useful, because it's much more skillful to cultivate a good dream than a nightmare. But at some point, we have to recognize we're in a dream, and we have to develop the wish to exit the dream. And that's what all the emptiness teachings are for. And really, if we want to help other sentient beings, it really comes down to that too, because it's not just our own dream, it's everyone else who's also dreaming. And so, when we're serving others, it needs to take on that component, because if we want to offer deeper service, that's what bodhicitta means. It means the most profound and deep service we can offer to our family, our friends, our loved ones, once we develop that same kind of connection to other sentient beings, to strangers, even to people we dislike. So it's connected. Now we can see in a practical way how emptiness is connected, because emptiness is talking about getting out of the dream. And where does suffering come from? It comes from the dream. Sure, suffering comes from being in a nightmare or not, but the truth is the suffering also comes from the good dream, right? Because even if you're in the best dream, because of karma, we have to come back to the nightmare eventually, right? Unfortunately, and we just circle in that. So at best, to go back to my point, at best, yeah, we're cultivating virtue to continue to practice the Dharma. But at worst, and this is what I would warn about, if we don't study emptiness and then apply it to developing bodhicitta, relative bodhicitta, at worst, bodhicitta becomes a virtue signal, right? A giant Buddhist virtue signal. Whoosh. I don't know. This is like a big vomit point for me. Just makes me, I have a real pet peeve to this, right? And again, maybe I just have to, maybe it's I'm going to admit, take that with a grain of salt. Maybe it's just my problem. But, for me, the worst is people faking saintly activity when inwardly they hold delusion and anger. Sure, do we want to, if we're angry, we want to be polite and not disturb other people's minds. That's just part of cultivating virtue and Dharma. But if we are being fake and we've convinced ourselves that we're being real, that's a problem. You see what I'm saying? And that's sometimes what a virtue signal is we've convinced ourselves we're virtuous when it's all just in our head, in our activity. So people who are at the most risk of this are people in religious roles. So when I was a monk, this is kind of where you run the risk of this. But when we're Sangha and Dharma centers, we sometimes run the risk of this too, because what it turns into is a form of spiritual pride. A virtue signal is also spiritual pride, where we subtly think we're better than others because we're more smiley and we're more slow. None of that has to do with Dharma. I'm sorry. It has nothing to do with Dharma. You could say kindness is an expression of, if it's genuine kindness, it's an expression of our health as a human being, of our compassion and love for others. But if it's fake kindness, what is that? It's really just our ego trying to manipulate other people when we look back at it. So again, it's a little tricky issue, because does that mean we should just be like our nasty, cranky self in our Buddhist sanghas? No, there's people who also do that, but people don't like them, and they make actually, in one way, it's wonderful because they give practice for other people, in Buddhist sanghas. So in one way, I'm happy for that, but in another way, I'm sad for them, So you all hear what I'm saying, but I think relative bodhicitta is definitely not a giant virtue signal. So in a way, I think the best kind of relative bodhicitta practice is one where nobody knows you're doing it, Like, in a way, I sometimes like when I have Dharma friends or something where I know they practice a lot of relative bodhicitta, but you never hear them talking about it. I mean, if someone's teaching, it's a little bit different because we have to talk about it. But in a way, I like that because you see they're really working on it internally. They're really working on it in their relationships, but they're not going blabbing around like they're some bodhisattva, A bodhisattva never says they're a bodhisattva. Why? Because they don't think of themselves like that. They have no sense of like, I'm this person doing this good deed or something like that. Anyways, I'm going a little bit on a rant. So, but this is just to recap, right? And also to point out how important the emptiness teachings are to the development of relative bodhicitta. So I said it before, in actuality, like emptiness is bodhicitta. It's just the absolute side of it. So we can think of bodhicitta, or the mind of awakening, as a coin with two sides. It's the same coin. One side is the non-dual aspect, one side is the relative aspect. And our job is to merge the two. So genuine bodhicitta, the heart aspect of it, the compassion, the loving kindness, the boundlessness to those, they don't really become true bodhicitta until they're merged with non-duality, right? And that's when someone becomes a bodhisattva. So just the 6 paramitas, for example. So, we have aspirational bodhicitta, and then we have engaging bodhicitta. And engaging bodhicitta means like once someone has realized non-duality to a certain extent, they're able to function in their activities with more freedom and openness, and they're able to benefit others from that place of there not being a person doing the generosity, or a person, being ethical. It just sort of comes. And so these paramitas are always embraced with wisdom. So when you really go into detail in studying the 6 paramitas, they're based on the 6th one, the paramita of wisdom. They're based on the wisdom of emptiness, or prajna. And that's because then the full freedom of the activity can come in a way that's aligned with reality, as opposed to kind of fake. So again, I'm trying to be careful here, because it's not like doing good things from a dualistic place is okay. We need to do that, but it's not liberation, In a sense, what we're trying to understand is like good things actually are natural to the mind that's realizing emptiness, which shows us something. Because emptiness is just the nature of reality, including our minds. It's not something we need to create. It's not a religious experience. It's more something we need to uncover. So that's the way I found it more helpful to think about. It's something we uncover. And because of that, it's a natural quality of things. And so because our mind can perceive, our perception can also perceive that it's also empty of true existence. And then once that's happening, we function from that place, right? And we're not caught. There's nothing to protect. All there is to serve others who think there's something to protect, until they also discover there's nothing to protect, and then they're free, right? So, there's many ways to talk about this, but I think it's sort of like when we're going into the deep end, we have to connect the two. So we're going to talk about that in one of the verses of how are we, what is relative and absolute truth, and what does it mean that they're in unity? Because right now they're separated for us. So we're kind of caught in the relative. Basically, part of our delusion as a sentient being is we're taking the relative to be absolute truth. And this is the problem. What I mean by this is like relative, we can think of it in a very simple way. Relative truth is this. My computer is on a table right now, and that table is interdependent and has a relationship with lots of things. But, I might think of this table as big or small, but its bigness and smallness is relative to the perceiver. It's relative to the situation. It's relative to other objects, right? Like for an ant, my table's really big. For me, it's kind of small, right? Because it's smaller than me. So that's what relative truth is. It doesn't mean that there can't be table and that a table can't appear and function. We're not trying to destroy the table. We're just understanding and seeing that its existence is relative. And here I think it's really helpful to include the perceiver, because it's mostly relative to the perceiver, meaning us, right? Like our perception. And so what I mean by we often mix this up and we take the absolute, actually we make the relative absolute, is when our habit pattern, our samsaric mind, our dualistic mind perceives the table as small, we usually believe that. We believe that perception for the moment, maybe not forever, but for the moment, we believe that. And then we've made something relative absolute. And then we get into all these problems with our life because we think it's absolute. Now, again, I'm talking about something that almost happens at an unconscious level. Because when we're getting into emptiness, we're not just talking about, yeah, sure, we'll be talking about it through words and concepts, but we're really talking about something that's also beyond concepts and also sub-thinking. These patterns are primal for us. They're so ingrained in the way we perceive and work with things. You know, even when we're talking about emptiness, we concretize emptiness. We make emptiness an absolute. Sorry, we relate to emptiness as a relative truth, and then we think that's the absolute. So you all see what I'm saying here with the table as an example? So it's a useful way to start to understand relative and absolute, because first we can start to understand without, you know, this isn't to say we're bad. Anytime we're recognizing a misperception or mistake, or how do you say it? Yeah, like misperceiving something or something we want to correct through the Dharma, it's never saying we're bad. Actually, already the Dharma established, we're not good or bad. Our Buddha nature is beyond good or bad, but we have patterns. So I like to think of it like this. We have patterns, and those patterns influence us, but those patterns are not us, right? And I know that's not an easy thing. That has to be realized. That takes some time in meditation. But it does change the premise, because there's not original sin. But sometimes when we hear these teachings, we take them in through the lens of original sin. And then we think it's pointing out something flawed with us. No, the problem is like we're wearing, you know, goggles or glasses that are tinting everything. That's the problem. So once we recognize that, we see it's not personal. So I just want to frame it that way, because whenever I'm pointing out this kind of like, we could call it like a way of looking at the downside, it's never personal. It's just looking at a habit pattern. So with that said, we kind of look at our relative experience. I forgot what I was saying, but maybe someone can remind me. But I was pointing out something we can start to look at, right? Because the emptiness teachings, they're not pointing to something out there. They're pointing to the nature of reality, which is also the nature of our experience and our minds. And in a way, what's easier sometimes is to recognize what is being misperceived. That's where the emptiness teachings start. They start by pointing out and cutting through the misperception. That's basically where Lama Tsongkhapa goes, you know, though he does start to talk about the unification of appearance and emptiness. We'll talk about that too. But you know, usually like Nagarjuna, when you study the middle way teachings, really they're like cutting things down. They're not building them up. And they're doing that to interrupt this habit of taking the relative to be absolute. And so we're cutting through that, right? And so we have to have kind of thick skin to recognize it's a misperception. It's not fundamentally part of who we are. Anyways, I forgot where I was going with that. So we'll kind of jump into the text. But this relative and absolute is useful to work out, because it also works out how we integrate relative bodhicitta with ultimate bodhicitta. You know, how we integrate the practice of compassion, loving kindness, and altruism with emptiness. It's really important. And that takes time, but I'm just mentioning it because it's really important that we start to think about that. So now let's look at the verse 9. Okay, so verse 9 says, if you lack the wisdom that realizes the nature of things, Although you might grow accustomed to renunciation and bodhicitta, you will be incapable of cutting through conditioned existence at its root. Exert yourself, therefore, in the methods for realizing interdependence. Okay. You could take it down because I'm going to be looking at mine. So I think I've kind of set this up already for us, right? Hopefully that, my kind of way of describing this elucidated why this verse, the meaning of this verse, why it matters. If we lack the wisdom that realizes the emptiness or the nature of things, we're going to be caught in our dream. We're never going to recognize what the true misperception is. And, the results of this in a very practical way is, I kind of call it, okay, I have a few different ways for talking about it for us modern meditators, but I would say one way is like, we kind of kick the can down the road, and we do it by blaming things around us. Blaming relative things around us for our problems. And then a new relative thing comes up, and then a new problem comes up. Or we repeat old habits in relation to new people or other things, or old people, whatever it is. But you see what I'm saying? It all gets projected out onto what we perceive to be an objective reality. That is actually our projection. So we're getting mad at and we're clinging to our own projection. So if we don't cut through that, we won't be able to truly undermine the causes of suffering. We're just kind of shifting them around. Yeah, maybe kicking the can is less accurate. But like a shell game, have you all seen that, where the shell just shifts? I guess in New York City in the 80s, people would do this. I don't know if it's so popular anymore. They have 3 cups and they just have like a ball or something, and you got to guess where the ball is, but they have like a lot of skill in just shifting it around to different cups, right? So you can never really guess it. So it's like that. We're just shifting the role of suffering onto other things. I use this analogy a little bit differently, but let's just try it here. I also have this kind of mantra. I never called that a mantra before, but I'll just call it a mantra here. Same shit, different clothes. So sometimes that's what's going on, right? Most of us are a little bit, we've lived a little bit more, let's put it that way. So probably you have a lot of experiences of this where like you got a new relationship or a new thing in your life or a new job, but some of the same things resurface, right? Some of the same relationships to things. So that'd be like same shit, different clothes. So what does that mean? It means like it has to do more with and I think non-Dharma people also understand this, modern therapy understands this. So they're penetrating in modern therapy a little bit in this. They don't go as far as what we're talking about tonight, right? Which is really talking about the whole thing is our projection. The whole thing is not real, it's relative. But we'll talk about this later because the relative still needs to be respected. So that's where it gets a little tricky. Otherwise, we end up in nihilism and we end up creating a lot of harm. So there is a subtlety to this. So anyways, if you have more questions, we can open up later. But basically, I think I summed up that verse. We'll be he says here, you'll be incapable of cutting through conditioned existence at its root. So therefore, exert yourself in the methods for realizing interdependence. So Lama Tsongkhapa here, he is pointing out interdependence, the meditation on interdependence and emptiness to be synonymous. And that's a real key point here, because he's mainly going to talk about emptiness as interdependence and interdependence as emptiness. So there was kind of a profound, you should all listen to this. So Khandro, I think some of you went to her teaching, Khandro Namsal Droma. She has different names, but I know her from that name. She gave a talk for Wisdom publication. So if you go to like Wisdom podcast, you can listen to that. And I think the first question was like, what do you do? But it was like something around that. And she said something like, I work with interdependence. That was her statement. And I was like, whoa, like right. But because she was implying this too. She's implying both, meaning she's working with connections. She's working with fluidity of interdependent nature and also emptiness, in relationship. Because emptiness doesn't mean nothingness. This means it more relates to interdependence. So we can go on in the next verse. By the way, before I say the next verse, this is really my favorite teaching. I mean, Lama Tsongkhapa was a profound not only writer and commentator on emptiness, but a meditator, lineage holder, like all of it. I mean, you know, if you read Lama Tsongkhapa's biography, he kind of like, you read it and it's kind of one of these things where it's like, you can't believe it's one person, because like the amount of meditation he did in retreat, he could have just been a yogi in retreat. The amount of writing and commentaries he wrote, he could have just been like a Buddhist scholar practitioner, you know, writing. The amount of like community development he did in founding monasteries and, you know, ultimately the Gelug lineage, he could have just done that. You see what I'm saying? But he did all of that and more. So, you know, Lama Tsongkhapa already, just from his biography, you can see was an exceptional being, you know, not a normal being. And specifically when it comes to the teachings on emptiness, Lama Tsongkhapa is known for his clarity of speech in how he writes. One of the reasons for that is, you know, at a certain point, he had a vision of Manjushri, the Buddha of wisdom, who blessed his body, speech, and mind. And you know, this gets experienced you can see this in biographies of different teachers and great yogis and yoginis, where there's some moment like this where something opened, you know. And again, it could also be an analogy for when they attain realization as well. But either way, Lama Tsongkhapa, pretty much in all of Tibetan Buddhism, no matter what the lineage is, there's agreement that he's one of the most clear writers of emptiness. The way he elucidated on emptiness is very direct. And Lama Tsongkhapa had a particular way of working with emptiness through the written word, where there can be a validity through the written word, right? Where there's a validation that happens, even though everyone agrees emptiness can never ever be a written word. It's just, I mean, I guess, the nature of the word is emptiness, but meaning like, you know, the word is just pointing to something that we need to practice or engage with to realize it experientially. Emptiness is something non-conceptual. Everyone agrees on that. But Lama Tsongkhapa had this particular way where the wording, there could be kind of authenticity in the wording or not. And he was really, really passionate about the words pointing to the experience in a very authentic and clear way. And so when we read his teachings on emptiness and we study them and we go deeper on them, they really help with that, right? With the written word. So I just wanted to say that. So we can look at verse 10. So the one who sees that cause and effect operate infallibly for all the phenomena of samsara and nirvana, and for whom any objects of conceptual focus have subsided, has set upon the path delighting all the Buddhas. Okay, so here, you know, Lama Tsongkhapa is laying out the right view. Literally, we could say this verse is showing the right view, meaning the view of emptiness. And right here is interesting, because right or correct, that's what I meant by what I said right before I read the verse. You know, Lama Tsongkhapa had this particular gift of pointing out like impeccability around how to describe a correct realization of emptiness, right? Correct in this in connection to what we call the Prasangika Madhyamaka view, right? So this is really all going into Prasangika, where for those of you who don't know, in Buddhism, we don't really have one view of emptiness. There is only one emptiness. There's not like many, but we have different pathways there, and we have there's different ways the Buddha taught emptiness according to the proclivity of different practitioners. And in that way, the way the Tibetan system organizes it, they organize it into a tenet system. So some of you maybe studied this, where they organize it into different viewpoints based on different sutras. And what that's all about is really just the Buddha taught to different proclivities. And it's all the same emptiness. It's just how much is he going into it? It's like a circle. And it's sort of like how much of the circle is the Buddha teaching at one time. So all the way from the Shravakyana teachings, where they're teaching anatta, which is more translated as not self, it's a partial emptiness that's being taught there. It's still emptiness. It's just part of the circle. And then from there, from the Tibetan point of view, you know, we go into that's basically Vaibhashika. You go from the Vaibhashika into the Sautantrika, which are, you know, Hinayana or Shravakyana views. Then you go into Chittamatra, right, view, and then into the middle way schools, the Svatantrika Madhyamika and the Prasangika Madhyamika. And then some other Tibetans, from other lineages start to go into other views like Shentong Madhyamika and all these things, which I don't want to get you too confused, but, there's other interpretations based on whatever sutras different lineages are taking as definitive. But again, this isn't like super deep down the rabbit hole of emptiness philosophy. I'm probably not the teacher for that either. But anyways, just something you should know, that when we say emptiness, we're talking about one thing, but there are some variations on what that is, right? And even within that tenet system, there's some disagreement on the way some Tibetan scholars have organized the views. Some would say, well, that view is complete in itself, but then they put it as lower, meaning only, part of the circle. So there is some nuances here if you really want to get into these studies. I find that really fun. But anyways, the point is most agree that the Prasangika Madhyamaka view elucidated on by Nagarjuna and then Chandrakirti and others, coming from the Prajnaparamita Sutras of the Buddha, that everyone would agree this is a definitive view, meaning definitive in it's not pointing to another experience. It's describing exactly how it is, right? As best it can with words. So anyways, just a little sidebar, but something you should know. So verse 10, okay, sorry, I'm going to get into verse 10. So here, Lama Tsongkhapa is just starting out by pointing out, already he's starting to talk about relative and absolute truth here, right? So I gave a really simple example of how to understand relative truth and absolute truth, which I can come back to if you need me to in another way. But here he's pointing it out in a different way. He's saying the one who sees, meaning the meditator, who sees that cause and effect operate infallibly, right? Meaning everything depends on cause and effect. That would be the relative aspect, right? Right. He says for all of samsara nirvana, not just samsara. And then he says, yet for whom any object of conceptual focus has subsided, which we have to talk about a little bit. This is someone who's set out on the path to lighting all the Buddhas, meaning this is someone who has a correct understanding and realization of emptiness. It could be an understanding he's referring to here because it's just talking about showing the right view. So what he's saying is basically a proper understanding and hopefully experience of how relative and absolute truth here are not in competition, so he's already starting to talk about the actual view of Prasangika, which is that the relative and absolute are in union. Because again, we study relative and absolute, not because they're two different things. The reason we study it is because that's how our bias is working right now. So we use it as a way to understand our samsaric mind, that our samsaric mind splits off into relative and absolute. And by recognizing that, we can slowly, practice and meditate and study emptiness and recognize that relative and absolute are not two different things. Let's use a simple example again with the table. Maybe I didn't go all the way with this. So we already established the table's relative nature. Brown is in relation to an agreement on the color brown, like my table's brown. Bigness and smallness is in relation to the perceiver, right? All you were catching that? That's pretty straightforward. So you could see it's relative. Whether my table's small or big, it never can be small or big, but it can be experienced and perceived as small and big based on interdependence or cause and effect. That's not a problem. The problem is when we grasp to that as absolute, as I pointed out. So what is the absolute truth? It's the same as what I just said. The absolute truth is that the table is interdependent and functions on many parts and conditions, including the perceiver, and therefore there's no bigness exists, no smallness exists, no table exists, right? It's all among interdependence. So this is the negation part. No table exists, no bigness exists, no smallness exists, no brown, no whatever exists. Yet the table doesn't not exist, right? Because it appears based on interdependence, based on cause and effect, and it can function. It can support my computer. We can label it a table. Actually, the whole reason we can label it a table and experience it as big and small is because it's empty. So it's another way to think of emptiness. Emptiness doesn't mean a nothingness, right? So if some of you are completely new to this, we have to reimagine the English word empty. It doesn't mean, it means empty of, right? And the ness part is really important here. In the Sanskrit word, we have shunyata, and the ta is the ness, and in Tibetan, ni. So we say tongpa ni. And ni is the ness part. It's tricky to talk about ness. There's kind of a sense of abiding within the ness. But we're kind of starting with the tongpa part, or the shunya, or the empty part. That's what we're starting with. But the ness also means it appears, it functions, it can function within cause and effect and interdependence. And we're going to see a moment, we could really meditate and realize emptiness either way. You could either meditate on the relative aspect of it, of being interdependent, or the empty aspect of it being interdependent. You see what I'm saying? I'm trying to break it down and make it real simple. But once, right? So that's what's happening here. So that's what he's pointing out, right? That the right view is beyond existence and non-existence. We have a way of talking about this in the philosophical teachings we call beyond the two extremes. Like whenever you read that in a text, that's what it means usually. Beyond the two extremes, the extreme of existence. Because we already said a big table doesn't exist, because a big table is in relation to lots of other things, right? So it doesn't exist in and of itself, or inherently, or truly. That's one way we qualify it. So it doesn't exist, but it also, that refutes its existence. But its non-existence, we can see it, we can interact with it. It still appears, it still functions. So we enter into this paradox that the thinking mind cannot grasp. That samsaric mind has to choose black, white, good, bad, big, small, like, dislike. And that is what causes suffering. Especially the like, dislike. This causes the suffering, right? So you see, I was really getting into the roots, the practical roots. So let's move on to verse 11. So there he's just pointing it out, and we're starting to talk about relative and absolute truth, and hopefully, some clarity around that. And so we got verse 11. The knowledge that appearances arise unfailingly in dependence, and the knowledge that they are empty and beyond all assertions, as long as these two appear to you as separate, there can be no realization of the Buddhist wisdom. So again, this is similar to what I was just saying, right? So here the Lama Tsongkhapa is he's actually pointing out the wrong view, which is possible. This happens to us, I just want to point it out. Well, as fledgling emptiness practitioners and learners, etc., all of us are going to get caught. We're going to waffle between the extreme of existence and the extreme of non-existence, otherwise known as eternalism and nihilism, right, in the philosophical teaching. So if you're kind of trying to find this perfect emptiness meditation that doesn't fall into either, I would just say in the beginning or even in an intermediate level, good luck. You're going to waffle, and it's okay. But the more we study, the more we get clear on what the waffling is. And then the more we meditate, the more we get clear experientially in what that feels like, or how that works, right? Because nihilism's a sneaky beast. How do you put it? Nihilism can be very gross and kind of like obvious in that we're denying the existence of something on a conceptual level or a level of belief. But actually, really what the Dharma is referring to here, in my opinion, is something much more subtle, where we don't take cause and effect seriously. So this is where karma comes in. And you have some people out there who will say you can realize these teachings and you can practice Buddhism without proper understanding and attention to karma. And then, sure, like I'm all for, like, you don't have to believe in anything you don't want to believe. And, the truth is, like, karma is an extremely hidden phenomenon. So it's not something we can prove right away. We need to kind of have a little bit of just a blind belief in it initially. And then the more we study emptiness, it becomes more clear via what he's describing here. But throwing it out completely basically throws emptiness out completely, because cause and effect is part of the fabric of reality. No, karma is a distortion of cause and effect, right? Karma is functioning within the dreamscape. So initially, the reason karma is taught is because we just need to respect the dreamscape. Like I said earlier, do you want to create a nightmare or like a decent dream? You know, probably you want to create a decent dream. If you have a choice, if someone gives you a choice, hey, you can't get out of the dream just yet, but you know, you can affect how the dream goes for you. You know, we're all going to choose that. We're going to be like, yeah, I'll take the yacht and the, you know, the bank, you know, full bank account and all that, you know, as opposed to like, you know, a hungry ghost existence or something like that. We would probably choose the former, right? So anyways, or whatever version that is for you, you know, but the point is that happens because of cause and effect. So initially, because we're bound by karma, we need to respect it, and we need to know how to, we need to understand it and respect it. And basic karma is just cause and effect. It's just on the level, it's on a relative level, and it's distorted, right? It's distorted cause and effect, essentially. But once we cut through this illusion of the clinging to a self and a clinging to phenomena, you know, what we work with in the emptiness teachings, we no longer believe our afflictive thoughts and emotions. Therefore, we no longer accumulate karma. But that doesn't mean cause and effect ended. Interdependence is continuing, but interdependence continues on a pure level. So this is like another side of this, where we have kind of the dream-like cause and effect, and then you have the, like, when you're out of the dream kind of cause and effect. And this is a debate I'm really interested in. So Tsongkhapa, who's like one of the greatest, I mean, I would say, like, if you put like the greats of Tibet up there, top 5 is going to be our author of our text here, Lama Tsongkhapa, Tsongkhapa, probably Milarepa. You know, you're gonna have these top, you know, so Tsongkhapa is like, wow, some of his writings are amazing, but he gets into some really interesting territory when he starts talking about nature of mind, because it starts to go into this area where it seems like it's saying it's beyond cause and effect. But I think there's some subtleties to that. So I don't think it's in contradiction to what's being talked about here. It's also a tantric view, so it's slightly different. But anyways, I'm getting totally off track now. So anyways, we can see through what I said earlier, you know, if we're not able to marry or meet in our emptiness study and practice, that there can be interdependence and function, right, based on, cause and effect, and yet we can't find, you know, a truly existent table or person or whatever. If we can't merge those, then we're going to always end up in these extremes of existence and non-existence. And that's not the view of emptiness. And that's what he's really defining here. That's not the correct view. So, you know, this is very deep material, right? So I just encourage you, come back to these verses again and again and read them, study them. Sometimes we need to study like more complex and deeper teachings on emptiness, and then we come back to this one. This is like real, like a pith text, you know what I mean? Where Lama Tsongkhapa, this is his shortest Lam Rim text. Actually, well, I think there's one that's a little bit shorter. Maybe this is the shortest one. But, you know, he also wrote the Lam Rim Chenmo, which is huge. And there's also, I really like the Lam Rim Dringpo, which is the middle length Lam Rim, which got published recently. I did a lot of retreat with that text. And anyways, but the point is, like, we rely on a lot of words when we're confused. And then the pith instruction is there to kind of something to come back to. So I view this kind of more as a meditation manual. So let's go to verse 12. Then he says, yet when they arise at once, not each in turn, but both together, then through merely seeing unfailing dependent origination, certainty is born, and all modes of misapprehension fall apart, that is when discernment of the view has reached perfection. So now he's actually talking about the experience, right? So he's moving here from like a correct understanding of the view to like, what's the incorrect understanding to what's the experience. So, this is a really deep verse here, because he's saying, okay, let's put it this way. So we already talked about this duality of the extremes of existence and non-existence, that the extreme of non-existence would be the table doesn't exist at all. The extreme of existence is the table exists and it always exists in the way I'm perceiving it, which is not something we would consciously say, but it's something often our delusion believes, right? If we really look at our experience and how we act and how our afflictive emotions rise, we'll see that's kind of how our mind is functioning most of the time. So imagine something where both of these have been cut through. It's neither existent nor non-existent. So it's neither, relative, it's neither big, small, etc., but it can function as big, small as much as it wants, right? So there's this merging of the relative and the absolute that really comes together in the teaching on interdependence, because we start to see both sides. Because things are interdependent, another way to say it is because things are in relationship, it means they can never, ever be the thing. They can never be something distinct from the relationship, right? That's another way to think of it. So we really have to think about this. Now we're kind of more in the study and reflection period on this, where you should reflect. You should kind of think about this deeply, use as your tools of reasoning. And we have, of course, Lama Tsongkhapa and others, they have all kinds of analytical meditations we can do based off logical reasoning. But just even now, I think that's a simple enough thing we can approach, which is that, a piece of bread is in relationship to the butter you put the bread on. Are they two things once you put the butter on the bread? No. But are they one thing? No. So we start to like bring in regular everyday examples. But this becomes very impactful when we're talking about something that we tend to take as singular, independent, and permanent, like self. So, do you exist in the wall in front of you? Is that you? Is that self? I mean, most people, that's a pretty obvious one to answer. No, right? But where do you exist within, where do you exist within your body and mind? That's a harder one to answer. And even a little bit more tough, like, where do you not exist? So if you can't find yourself in your body and mind, does that mean you don't exist? So these are the kinds of things we meditate on here, right? So someone who's completed the analysis means someone who's realized emptiness. That's what he's referring to in verse 12. It means someone who no longer experiences that disparity, where things appear as singular, independent, and permanent, right? Essentially. And so this would be the realization of interdependence, is what he's pointing out here, right? And it's a non-conceptual realization. He pointed that out in the previous verse. Let's see if he's not saying that here. I'll say that later. And then he says, certainty is born. And so there's different kinds of certainty. This is maybe a roadmap for you all, just depending where you're at. First we need intellectual certainty. And that's where we study the teachings on emptiness, right? And certainty means we understand the teachings. They make logical sense to us. We can kind of describe them, etc. We have clarity on that. And that, of course, grows. It's not like a one-time, one and done thing. That grows. Then there's the certainty that starts to grow in experience, where we start to taste what he's talking about here non-conceptually. That goes beyond intellect, right? But then there's the certainty of realization, where we have no doubt about our experience of emptiness, and we've cut through these two extremes of existence and non-existence in relation to our minds and perception, thoughts, emotions, etc., experientially. And that is true certainty. That's the actual certainty we're looking for as a practitioner. And that certainty goes completely beyond concept. You could have used concepts to get you to that certainty, but at a certain point you had to take a leap. Or as the Buddha says, At a certain point, whatever concepts we were rubbing together like two sticks, they need to catch on fire, and they both need to be consumed by that fire, right? So that's what we're talking about here. So you can see the dedication, the perseverance we need to do this, right? So I think most of us are probably at the stage we're just trying to gain more certainty in our understanding. And then what we want to do is we want to have, like I already shared, I apologize, I'm not sharing so much practice during these teachings, but we want to have some simple practices that we can put into effect, and that we can start to develop some experiential certainty. And usually these things go together, like, meaning like, so it depends how we're training. In the monastery, they train, well, it depends what monastery, but the majority of monasteries, they train a lot in conceptual certainty. And then at a point, that conceptual certainty that based on reasoning, logic, debate, etc., it starts to cross over into experiential, right? But they really, really focus on that. For householder practitioners, it's not that practical, in my opinion. But that doesn't mean we should be a slouch. It doesn't mean we shouldn't do our due diligence in studying emptiness. It just means that we need to integrate a little quicker. What that means is, like, we shouldn't think of it as separate, the way we work with certainty of understanding, certainty of experience, and certainty of realization. Meaning, we need to bring it into practice right away. Realization takes time, but whatever we're working with conceptually, we need to have a simple form of meditation to directly put that into practice. That's what I'm saying. That's what I recommend, right? We need to have some way to directly put it into practice. Okay, let's go on to verse 13. I want to leave plenty of Q&A, so I'm going a little fast. Okay, so verse 13. When you know that appearances dispel the extreme of existence, while the extreme of nothingness is eliminated by emptiness, and you also come to know how emptiness arises as cause and effect, then you will be immune to any view entailing clinging to extremes. Okay, so Lama Tsongkhapa kind of flips it up here, right? And so this might be like more confusing as you read this. This is one of the verses quoted often by all lineage masters. I've heard Nyingma, Kagyu lineage masters quote this verse from Lama Tsongkhapa because it's very profound, and it's very, like I said, Lama Tsongkhapa had this gift of pointing out through words very clearly and directly. He's pointing out the view here extremely clearly, and this would be also a particular special quality of the Prasangika view, right? Where I already talked about it, so hopefully this kind of makes sense already. Maybe not, we'll see. But, I already talked about it, that interdependence itself can point to the empty aspect, or it can point to the interdependence aspect. And so what he's saying here is, for a practitioner who's realized emptiness, they know they've realized the Prasangika view, full Prajnaparamita is really what it's talking about, when through reflecting on the negation of something, they're able to see the interdependence of something. And vice versa, when they're reflecting on the interdependence or the cause and effect nature of something, they're able to see, they're not finding anything. You see what I say by this? So if we go back to my example of a table, if one is reflecting on the parts of the table, and by reflecting on the interdependent nature of the table, we have a realization of emptiness where we can't find a table. That would be the one side. Or the other side, we're reflecting that a table is empty of true existence, and therefore it's interdependent, and we have that experience, right? So this is talking more experientially, but he's reversing it. So for where we're at, it's really useful too for where we're at, because we can use it as a way to meditate on emptiness. So I already said, like, a window, the relative is the window into emptiness. That's another way to think of this. There's a famous Zen saying that relates a little bit more to Mahamudra, but we can use it here. Mahamudra is basically Prajnaparamita. Okay, let me say this carefully. Mahamudra reaches the same realization of Prajnaparamita, and Prajnaparamita reaches the same realization if we complete the practice as Mahamudra, but the paths are different and the practices are different to reach that same realization. But we have this saying, in the land of Tibet, the view of Dzogchen, the view of Mahamudra, and the view of Prajnaparamita or Madhyamaka or middle way, the view is the same. The path, the practice is slightly different. So because the view is the same, the result is the same, but the path is slightly different. But anyways, I was going to use this quote from a Zen tradition that goes like, first mountain, no, simplify. I'm kind of paraphrasing because I forget it, but basically like mountain, no mountain, then mountain. So mountain, no mountain, then mountain. So really it's related to this verse, because first we're talking about mountain, which is our fixed real perception. The table is exactly as it appears to me. It's permanent, it's unchanging, it's singular. You know, we're not seeing the interdependent, empty nature of it. That would be the mountain, or if we're seeing a mountain that way. No mountain, we negate, right, that the table exists truly. We see that it's dependent upon parts. And so we can't find we can't find it through logical reasoning or in meditation. We can't find a truly existent or an independent table or mountain. But then as we move further, mountain still appears, but now it's not, it's the same mountain as before, but now we perceive mountain as interdependent. And that's how the two truths unify, right? So another way to think of it. So first no table, so first table, then no table, then table. Because no table and table are in alignment, but it's not the same as the first table or the first mountain. First mountain was coming out of delusion, right? Anyways, I'm sure a lot of people interpret that. I'm not a Zen koan guy, so I'm sure different people interpret that differently. But one of my teachers, Sonny Rinpoche, he used that example to describe emptiness, and I liked it. And I think it's in line with what we're talking about here. So essentially, we're still talking about interdependence. Okay, so let's go on to the next verse. Okay, so now we're kind of coming to the end of the text. So verse 14, when in this way you have correctly understood the key points of the three principal aspects of the path, withdraw to solitude, dear child, strengthen your diligence, and swiftly accomplish the ultimate and lasting aim. Okay, so this gets down to the main point, which is, you know, have you all read Milarepa's, have you read any of Milarepa's biography or songs or stories or anything like that? So I think this was Gampopa. So Milarepa had given everything to Gampopa, you know, who was one of his main disciples. And, you know, they basically reached a point where Milarepa said, you know, I have no more teaching to offer. You have all the practice. You have all the teachings, you have all the practices. You need to just go and practice, you know, and attain realization. And so Gampopa thanked Milarepa, and, you know, they said goodbye. And then Gampopa walked off to go back to do retreat, probably. And Milarepa just started yelling, you know, saying, you know, oh, wait, you know, I have one more thing, you know, come back. And then, you know, Gampopa came back, but Milarepa kind of had some doubts. He said, you know, I don't know, though. I don't know if you're, this is, you know, this is like the most secret teaching. I'm not sure. Maybe you need to do the other things first and come back. But anyways, Milarepa eventually sort of said, okay, I'll give you the teaching. And so, you know, so then Milarepa, he just wore like a very simple white robe, you know. So at that point, Milarepa lifted up his, like, you know, shamtab, like his yogi skirt or whatever, and showed his raw bare ass that basically looked like stone. Like it was like calloused and hard and, you know, not a normal human booty. It was very, very like, you know, raw and, you know, and that was the teaching. You know, that was his last teaching. He didn't say anything. He just showed his ass to Gampopa. And, you know, Gampopa got it. The essence is to practice. The essence is to put these teachings into practice. Now, are we Milarepa? We're not. You know, let's just be honest here. You know, I spent a lot of years, not implying that you all are, but I spent a lot of years in some Tibetan Buddhist fantasy. Just drop it, my opinion, you know, right? Just drop it. You all are where you're at. You're in the cultures you're in. You have the habit patterns you're in. You know, we're obviously not monastics here. I got to spend 9 beautiful years as a monastic, which I'm ever thankful for. Incredibly precious. Still didn't make me Milarepa, by the way, you know, but I don't care. I'm serious. Like I'm not trying to be bold or arrogant with that statement. There's a certain wisdom in recognizing where we're at. And I'm sure some of you have this, you know, as we, some of us here have lived longer, as I put it. So we, you know, some of you have confidence in this. You are, it's not like you are who you are, because the emptiness teachings refute that, but it's more like we are where we are. And if we, our Milarepa is to make our life our cave. This is really the conclusion. I've really thought about this a lot in my own life and what I want to share with people in the West as modern meditators, because we can dream all we want. No, there's nothing wrong with aspiring that later in life and or in future lives we can become like Milarepa physically, literally, or we can become, you know, monastic or whatever that is. There's nothing, or a serious, you know, full-time retreatant. There's nothing wrong with that. And I'm not saying retreat is bad or that any of this is, you know, we should aspire to this, but let's be realistic. What we need to do is turn our life into a cave. You know, if we're going to be successful at our Dharma practice, we need to make our householder life our cave, meaning our cave goes with us everywhere we walk, right? So there are very successful householder practitioners in the Tibetan tradition, 100%. So this can look so many different ways. You know, I really wish more translators, I mean, I'm sure there's a wish for it. There's just too much to translate in general. There's a lot, but in the Tibetan canons, I mean, the different lineages, etc. But I wish more biographies would come out of like simple, you know, they call them grandfather practitioners in Tibetan Buddhism, which means like you see images of them, you know, grandmothers, grandfathers who are spinning the prayer wheel and, you know, walking around the stupa and stuff like that. And, you know, there's certain cultural elements that maybe we would practice in a different way than them. But the point is, some of these people do attain realization, you know, some of these people also attain realization at younger ages. The point is, you know, they use their life for practice, and we have to figure out how to do that now. You know, we're not in Tibet in the you know, 12th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th centuries. Maybe we were, maybe that's why we like these teachings, you know, but we messed around, let's be honest, you know, so we're back here, you know, listening to me, who's kind of a goofball, you know, so, you know, but I'm saying that, I'm kind of joking, but I mean that, like, this is it. There's nothing else. So we have to grow our understanding. We have to know what we're putting into practice, and then we have to practice like our hair is on fire. But that often means it's according to our circumstance. Otherwise, we're always wishing for something in the future. We're always wishing, oh, if you know, oh, maybe I'll become a monastic son. And again, I want to separate this conversation. It's a great thing to aspire to become a monastic or a yogi or yogini. Wonderful. You should do that. But you could also, a yogini or yogi means the inner world. It doesn't mean the outer world. The monastic is just a certain expression of that. A cave-dwelling yogi is a certain expression of that. Now, is there a reason those things exist in the tradition? Yeah, because they work. You know, they're really good methods for practicing the Dharma. So I want to be clear here. I'm not demeaning any of that. They're very clear methods. But let's be really honest with ourselves. This is something I think we need to realize. Otherwise, Tibetan Buddhism is never going to grow up in the West. We're always going to be stunted, thinking we're lesser, and we're never going to get it, because we're never going to practice, because we're going to always think in the future I'll do it, right? So this is kind of my message here, and Lama Tsongkhapa is really saying this. You know, when we've understood the key points of renunciation, bodhicitta, and emptiness, which, like I said, is more like a circle. So we're going to come back to this again and again. Do it as best you can. That just means start. Even if it's 5 minutes, do it. And then more and more, think of your mind and body as a cave. and put more energy into it, and do that in a way that's realistic for you, without undermining yourself. Like if you're always craving and demeaning yourself, thinking, I don't do enough, I'm a terrible practitioner, that's not the way. Just do what you do and go, and it'll get better. You'll increase your practice. You'll be able to integrate it with more situations. Not all the practice happens on the cushion, so we have to be honest about that too. You know, we need to use the cushion, we need the formal practice, but if we're going to really make progress as a householder, it means we need to integrate it. And we need to have something to integrate. That's also what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying. Okay, that's my rant. So let's go to verse 15. Oh, that's it. That was the last verse. So yeah, that's about it. We can open up for Q&A. I just wanted to say really quick, you know, I appreciate being able to give this teaching. This is probably one of my favorite texts in the Tibetan Buddhist world. I've taught it a few times now. I really enjoy it. I always get new things out of it every time. It's really core. Like really, if like, this would be one of my desert island texts. You know, it's really core. We really have everything here, as I said earlier. I received this teaching in many different forms through many different kinds of Lamrim teachings from a variety of my lamas, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, Choden Rinpoche, others. And then I received it in its completeness from Dzongtsar Khyentse Rinpoche, where he gave a teaching on it in Nepal, I think in 2011 or 12 or something like that. So yeah, that's where I received this teaching from, and I continue to practice this. I continue to fail. I continue to persevere, and that's what it's all about. Just continuing, you know. Yeah. So yeah, let's open it up a little bit. What's on your minds? Sure. Fernando, you have something?
Yes. Well, according to the three principal aspects of the path, I guess, that I have, and I mean, it's difficult, starting with renunciation, because as you were saying, we are householders, or we are here in the middle of, and a friend of mine who was, well, he is a monk. Lama Zopa Rinpoche gave him habits and stuff, but then again, he told me, don't become a monk in this lifetime. So I was like, well, I wasn't thinking about it. I've never thought about becoming a monk. In fact, what I like more is the Mahasiddhic style, you know, that craziness, that intense. Drukpa Kunli, it's my hero, for example. And
you should really become a monk then.
Should I? Well, I was told the other way around. And also told me, due to the fact that I'm a bit crazy, I guess, he gave me like a specific way to practice. And I guess that I've never liked a contemplative way, neither in Christianism, where I started my spiritual life, I would say, neither in Buddhism. I don't like shamatha, and that has always been a struggle for me. You know, I've always asked myself, should I say that I'm not a Buddhist? Because I don't like to meditate just like looking at my breath. You know, I like more teachings, I guess, and to a certain degree the tantric stuff, although for that you need shamatha. And then again, they say that if you want to become a bodhisattva, you have to attain shamatha. And one of my friends, the same monk that I was telling you about, he said, you gotta practice a bit more, at least at Gatika, which is like 24 minutes, which represent an hour for every, minute that you practice. And he said, once that you reach the 5th level, you will have a bliss that you will never experience with any drug in this air. And I was like, well, that's a good incentive, I guess, considering my life. And so I like bodhicitta, I like teachings. It's really hard, emptiness, and renunciation is out of my mind. But then also my friend says renunciation is not about becoming a monk and going to the Himalayas and stuff, but not to get a touch of what you experience in every single moment of your life. So it helped a lot what you were saying about to become, and also this other monk told me we have to be urban yogis. I don't know if I'm pronouncing
it right.
Junkies? Yogi urbano. No, yogis.
Oh, not yogis, yogis. Oh, urban yogis, urban yogis, urbano yogis. Yeah, sí. Entiendo. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there. Do you want me to say something, or you just wanted to share it, or?
I wanted to share, but I would like also what you think about it, because, well, I mean, you already said that I should become a monk if I like Drukpa Kunli and Padmasambhava and Shantideva and all of them.
No, I'm joking because how do you put it? Yeah, I mean, okay. Drupal Kunle was, someone who realized emptiness. So he wasn't, if we try to do like Drupal Kunle, it's not crazy wisdom. It's just crazy, So I call it wisdom, crazy wisdom without the wisdom, So
Here's something. I'm sorry for interrupting you, but I just wanted to share this also. It's just like, I mean, it's not that I want to be or behave like a Mahasiddha, because I mean, I know that I have to reach and realize emptiness before doing whatever they were doing. Nonetheless, I'm already, well, yeah, maybe I'm crazy. Okay, sorry. I'm sorry for it.
Yeah. I mean, this is yours to work out, but the point is, yeah, you have a lot of enthusiasm. So like, one of the instructions from one of my lamas, Pakchok Rinpoche, I liked his enthusiasm. I mean, I liked his example. In Nepal, they burn a lot of plastic. In Mexico también, I don't know. They kind of, yeah, sometimes. Yeah, they just burn. There's so much plastic, so they burn it instead of throwing it away. So, what happens when you light plastic on fire? It's not like lighting paper. It goes very fast, like when you light plastic, it's shoot, and it's gone. So his advice was, when we're really enthusiastic for the Dharma, don't be like burning plastic, So in a way, it's like how to have that long-term view and then use our enthusiasm as a steam, to go over time and to go deeper. So I think that's good. You have enthusiasm. Just, I would say, don't be like burning plastic, And the truth is, like, there's nothing to become, man. There's nothing, So it's really beautiful to have aspirations to be like these practitioners. We should have those aspirations. I have them too. But the truth is, really the aspiration has to go into realizing the Dharma. That's how Drupal Kunle became Drupal Kunle and Guru Rinpoche became Guru Rinpoche, is they realized the Dharma. So that's where the passion should go. And then, like I was saying, there's these three aspects: understanding, experience, and realization, So you're doing good, man. It sounds good. Just keep going, and just keep working on it. And what was I going to say? The renunciation piece, it's more related to, like, we need to reflect enough on the nature of our suffering to become exhausted with the mind that wants to create suffering. That's really what it is. Yes, it's about clinging, but I think that becomes very superficial sometimes. It comes down to clinging as an experience. But in order to release clinging, we have to become exhausted with our actions, behaviors, and states of mind that are creating suffering. And that takes time, that takes time. And then what happens is the mind turns. That's why we call them the four mind turnings in other lineages, the often, the path of renunciation, because we're turning the mind towards awakening. And so that has to become organic and natural. It's not just the intellect the intellect is not enough to turn it. That's the start. And then we need to look at the mind. We need to look at our behavior. We need to look at our actions. We need to look at the result of our actions. And we need to see this isn't working anymore, and that has to be in a way without blame and without, how do you say it? Sin. Because it's not about sin. It's about getting exhausted. So that's a process, So that's just what I would say about renunciation. But yeah, just keep going. And you have lamas, yeah, stay close to your lamas and get advice and practice, man. Just but how do you say it? Yeah, these three principles are in everything. So to me, this is everything. And Tantra and all the other things, they don't matter without these. So that's where, we have to get clear on that. But yeah, that's all I got to say. But great. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for your energy. Elaine, yeah, please.
So
Muchas gracias. My Spanish sucks, man. And I live in Mexico and I'm a gringo without Spanish. And I feel bad for that, to be honest, because I'm just super lazy with language. My wife is Colombian, but she speaks English. So we don't speak Spanish. Anyway, sorry, Elaine. Just complaining to my hermano here about my predicament in Espanol.
Can you explain how karma relates to emptiness?
Yeah. So cause and effect is that side where emptiness is not nothingness. So what would be the nothing? What would be the not nothingness? It would be that things arise based on interdependence, you know? And so that's another way to say cause and effect. And karma is a subset of cause and effect. But karma is also a distorted view of cause and effect. Right? So that's how we think of karma in Buddhism. It's just a subset of cause and effect that, you know, due to the intricacy of moving parts in the mind, body, and speech, there's ripples that move out into what looks like time. But time is also a distortion. So karma's a relative phenomena, but karma's, so it's not true, but it's kind of like, it's still related to cause and effect. So there's some function there. And then when we realize emptiness, we also cut the root of karma, but we don't cut the root of cause and effect. Cause and effect upgrades at that point to interdependence or pure appearance. Sometimes we call it that.
Isn't cause and effect a scientific thing? For every action, there's an opposite and equal reaction or whatever.
Yeah,
So-
that's why, like, for Buddhists, like, the karma is like a Buddhist science. It's not a belief, you know, necessarily.
Right.
It's just something very subtle, so we can't see it, you know.
I really think the Buddhists were really the first quantum physicists.
Yeah, I think there's quantum physicists who believe that too. Like, the Dalai Lama was really close with, I think it's Francisco Varela, who's one, you know, he's from Argentina. I don't remember where he's from. Chile. Oh, okay. So Francisco Varela. So yeah, I'm sure they talked about this. Yeah. No, I mean, Buddhism is rich with a lot of, it's just, I hope Western science will discover this at some point. They need to create a pedagogy and a system of working with subjective reality. They're obsessed with objective reality. Buddhists already realized there is no objective reality. Why would you even want to bother with that? Look at subjective reality, right? But Western science, not all of it, but some of it is obsessed. They're obsessed with objective reality, you know? And because that's what Western culture generally is. It's based on a Godhead. It's based on a creation. Buddhists don't believe in a creation. So already it just sort of, they can let that go. Anyways, just some of my complaints. Yeah. Anyone else? We can do a couple more. If you all are okay going over for 5 minutes or something. If there's anything on your minds.
Well, I'll just mention what Venerable Rina has said before, because you mentioned junkies. She always says, we are all junkies. We're already junkies. So attached to something, chocolate cake, she always says.
Yeah, it's true. I like jarritos. What's this? Yeah. And ¿cómo se dice? Pocket taxo? Pocket, yeah.
Yes. Jarritos, they even reached to Australia. I lived there for 2 years, and I was surprised that they reached all the way there. So yeah.
And I love tortillas in the morning, but I'm not a tortilla junkie. I don't know if I would say that. They're just really good with eggs. Okay, everyone. Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this experience with you, and thanks for inviting and allowing me to rant for 3 Thursday nights. No, 4, but 3 Thursday nights on this. And yeah, practice. Really, that's, you know, just as a Dharma friend, I would say, put this into practice as much as you can. If you don't know how to put it into practice, find out how. But at least you have some more information on the text. Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Back, and you can give us some practice. So Jack, put that
Sure.
in. Yeah. And maybe we'll do our dedication prayers real quick.
Yeah. Thanks, Patty and Gina, by the way, too, for hosting. Okay. Let's do it in English. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly gain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel Bodhichitta that has not arisen arise and grow. And may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, the incomparably kind Supreme Tenzin Gyatso. May you have a long life and all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And especially, you know, most of my Lam Rim teaching comes from Lama Zopa Rinpoche, so we can really put some heartfelt energy into aspiring for his return. You know, I mean, the Buddhas, they're here. They're, as soon as we think of them, they're here. So Lama Zopa's, he's here, in my opinion. He didn't go anywhere, but we want him in human form again, so we can engage with him in his human aspect, so to speak. Because when they're in a human aspect, they're relatable enough that we can deepen our dharma through them. Yet, you know, realized enough that they give us something to look forward to aspire to attain. So I really feel like Lama Zopa Rinpoche was like that. And it's just amazing. He spent his whole life teaching Lam Rim and the contents we worked with here. So just really praying for his return. Peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pradeka Buddhas, victorious Losang, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings, through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and from other living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings, the ocean of the three jewels, and the great waves of Bodhichitta of the children of the victorious ones, and the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Scott.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Patty. Thank you,
very much,
Gina.
Scott.
You know.
Thank you.
Bye,
everybody.
Elaine. Bye, Jack.
Bye, everyone.
Fernando.
Bye.